It began just before dawn on an otherwise quiet Sunday. Across the United States, from the windswept plains of Nebraska to the crowded boroughs of New York, sirens wailed and then fell silent. Guards radioed frantically, but every electronic lock had clicked open at once. By sunrise, every federal, state, and county prison stood empty. More than 2 million incarcerated men and women stepped through the gates, free. At first, disbelief ruled the morning. News anchors stumbled through their scripts, calling it a mass malfunction, a technical impossibility. Governors activated emergency operations while sheriffs pleaded for answers. Yet surveillance footage confirmed the same eerie scene everywhere. Doors unlocking without force, alarms muted, guards unhurt. It was as if the walls themselves had decided to release their captive. On city streets, the first hours were a mix of stunned silence and chaotic energy. Families rushed to meet loved ones they never expected to see outside a visitation room. Some people embraced weeping relatives. Others simply stared at the open sky, hardly daring to breathe. Social media still functioning. Unlike the prison infrastructure, exploded with live streams of bewildered citizens walking free after decades behind bars. Not everyone celebrated. Police scanners buzzed with tension as officers debated whether to rearrest or stand down. Shop owners lowered metal shutters. Parents pulled children inside. For many Americans, the thought of every convicted murderer, thief, and violent offender suddenly roaming the streets was more than unsettling. It was terrifying. The federal government called emergency meetings, but there was no immediate plan. Helicopters circled major cities. The National Guard deployed around courthouses and government buildings. Yet without clear orders, even the military hesitated to confront millions of newly released individuals who were at that moment technically no longer inmates. Economists predicted instant strain. Entire industries, private prisons, food suppliers, security contractors faced collapse. Meanwhile, advocates for criminal justice reform saw an unthinkable opportunity. Lawyers flooded airwaves arguing that the mass release exposed the fragility of a system built on incarceration. If we can live through this day, one prominent activist said, we can imagine a society that does not depend on cages. But for ordinary families, the questions were immediate and personal. What if a neighbor's abusive ex returned tonight? What if someone wrongfully convicted could finally come home? Fear and relief intertwined in every conversation. By nightfall, highways clogged as freed men and women sought rides, shelters, or simply a place to sleep. Some quietly reported to churches or community centers, asking for guidance. Others disappeared into the dark, their next move unknown. America had awakened to a reality no one had rehearsed. A nation without prisons. The first 24 hours tested every belief about justice, safety, and redemption. And as the moon rose over emptied cell blocks, the country faced a single electrifying question. What happens tomorrow? Days turned into weeks and the United States struggled to find its balance. The first 72 hours after the mass release were marked by frantic movement, families reuniting, city councils holding emergency sessions, and news networks broadcasting non-stop. By the end of the first week, the country realized this was not a fleeting crisis, but a new reality. Local governments scrambled to provide temporary housing. Community centers, gymnasiums, and even unused shopping malls became shelters for thousands with nowhere to go. Social workers, faith leaders, and volunteers worked around the clock, handing out food, blankets, and information about healthcare and employment. For many former inmates, it was the first night in years, or decades, spent outside a cell, and the adjustment was overwhelming. Economically, the shock was immediate and uneven. The private prison industry collapsed overnight, taking with it tens of thousands of jobs. Vendors who supplied uniforms, bedding, and cafeteria food faced bankruptcy, yet other sectors experienced a strange. Transportation services reported record demand as people traveled to find relatives or new opportunities. Small businesses in struggling towns suddenly had a massive pool of potential workers, eager to earn a paycheck. Law enforcement faced the hardest decision. Some police departments tried to rearrest individuals convicted of violent crimes, only to meet public resistance. Civil rights lawyers flooded courthouses with emergency motions, arguing that a universal malfunction was an act of nature, not a jailbreak. Judges were divided. Some issued warrants, while others insisted that society should not attempt to refill the prisons until deeper reforms were considered. Communities experienced a complicated mix of fear and hope. In some neighborhoods, violent incidents did rise. Robberies of convenience stores, domestic disputes reignited, old gang rivalries briefly flared, but other stories surprised the nation. Former inmates volunteered to clean parks, repair homes, or mentor at-risk youth. Churches reported standing room-only services, led by men and women who spoke about redemption and second chances. Politicians scrambled to craft legislation. A bipartisan task force proposed a nationwide reconciliation program, background checks, counseling, and mandatory community service for those with serious offenses, paired with rapid job training for nonviolent ex-prisoners. The federal government diverted billions of dollars, once used for incarceration, into education, mental health services, and addiction treatment. Public opinion shifted by the day. At first, polls showed overwhelming anxiety, but as the weeks passed, many citizens began questioning whether mass incarceration had been necessary in the first place. Television panels debated alternatives: restorative justice, circles, expanded probation systems, and investments in early childhood education to prevent crime before it started. By the end of the first month, America was no longer the same country. City streets were busier, yes, but not in the dystopian way many had feared. The absence of prisons forced an uncomfortable but unavoidable conversation. If a society can survive a sudden release of every inmate, what exactly were those walls protecting in the first place? A full year passed, and the United States had settled into a rhythm that once seemed unimaginable. Entire landscapes of towering razor wire and silent guard towers stood abandoned, overgrown with wild grass and climbing vines. Former prison towns reinvented themselves as education hubs, manufacturing centers, or vast community farms. Buildings that once held thousands behind bars now hosted classrooms, art studios, and addiction recovery programs. Iconically, the nation experienced a remarkable shift. Without the burden of housing more than 2 million inmates, federal and state budgets redirected billions of dollars into schools, mental health services, and neighborhood infrastructure. Cities once drained by the costs of policing and incarceration invested in public transit, libraries, and job training. A generation that would have been trapped in cycles of arrest and release now found apprenticeships in construction, healthcare, and renewable energy. Culturally, a deeper transformation unfolded. Families long torn apart by prison walls began to heal. Children who once visited parents through thick glass now shared dinners, birthdays, and ordinary moments. Communities launched local councils to mediate disputes and prevent violence before it began. Restorative justice programs flourished, bringing victims and former offenders together to seek understanding and practical repair. What began as a crisis evolved into a nationwide experiment in reconciliation. Not every challenge disappeared. Some individuals committed new crimes, forcing lawmakers to craft targeted responses, secure rehabilitation centers for those who posed ongoing danger, and specialized courts to handle serious offenses swiftly. Yet even with these setbacks, crime rates overall did not explode as many had predicted. Instead, they gradually stabilized, echoing a hard truth: incarceration had never been the sole barrier between safety and chaos. The absence of prisons also changed how Americans viewed justice itself. The question shifted from how long should someone be punished to how can we prevent harm in the first place. Schools introduced conflict resolution courses alongside math and science. Cities funded youth mentorship programs as aggressively as they once funded police departments. Citizens began to see public safety as a shared responsibility, rather than a service delivered by distant institutions. On a quiet evening, in what had once been a maximum security facility, a former inmate led a free philosophy seminar. Around him sat teenagers, grandparents, and a few retired correctional officers. They debated ethics and forgiveness under a sky unobstructed by floodlights. The moment captured a new national reality: the idea that people are more than the worst thing they have done. America's prison-free year proved something few had dared to imagine: that a society could choose transformation over containment. There were still crimes to confront, conflicts to resolve, and pain to heal. But the towering cells that once defined American justice had become museums of a past era. What began as a mysterious overnight release ended as a profound lesson: true security grows not from cages, but from opportunity, community, and the courage to believe in second chance.